It must have been when I was a child. It was so long ago. It's great to have you here. In fact, I can't believe this is the 30th time we've run this conference, and we now run it every year, so it's great to have you here. Since COVID, I'm also speaking to people who are online, so this session will be recorded online. Mostly people access the sessions asynchronously, so welcome to all the people who are online as well. And I want to give you a brief sense of how many people there are and who they are. We actually have just over 400 people attending the conference. 168 are online only. So welcome to all you folks who are at home or at work or something who've joined us. We have 236 people here in person at the conference. And we have a nice mix of English and Spanish. So for a number of years now, we run this conference bilingually wherever we are in the world. And we do this jointly with our wonderful colleagues at the University of Granada in Spain, including Tamara, who's here, who'll say welcome to everybody in Spanish in just one moment. And also our colleague, Jose Luis Ortega at the University of Granada. So welcome to all the Spanish speakers. In fact, we have nearly 100 Spanish delegates who are here, Spanish-speaking delegates who are here in person, and we have a 90 who are online, so welcome to all of you folks as well. And we have 90 people who are from Brazil, including the wonderful national project that Valkyria Montemor has been involved in, and she'll be welcoming you in just one second. We have delegates at the conference and online from unbelievably 26 countries. So this is, for a lot of people, Sao Paulo is a long way away. So for all of those people who've traveled a long way, but all the other people who are traveling a long way via Zoom, welcome. And the countries include Australia, Canada, Colombia, Peru, Costa Rica, South Africa, Uruguay, Venezuela, Ecuador, USA, Chile, and lots more countries. So welcome to everybody. But also I want to speak about this learner research network. So what we want to do is build a knowledge community. Conferences are ephemeral, they come and go, and you might go home with a couple of business cards in your pocket or something. But what we do is kind of much more systematic than that. So since COVID, we've been, when we were forced to go fully online for a couple of years, we've been encouraging people to record their sessions, even if you're here in person. That means the online people can access them. And in fact, the stats are, which I have, I don't know whether I have it here, but I think there are, no, it's not here, but from memory, there are about 250 online presentations already. And one of the advantages of that for you folks who are here in person, but obviously also the online people, is the recording is there. So even if you're in the session, there's a discussion board below the abstract and the recording, or just the abstract if you haven't put in a recording. And if you haven't put in a recording, please do. It's not too late. In a regular conference, one or two people could ask a question at the end. And I have a theory, actually. It's always the wrong people who ask the first question. But anyhow, it means that it's very, very open. And please use the discussion boards to interact with people. And even though the discussion is mostly asynchronous, every comment you put triggers an email with a link back to that discussion for the presenter. So we built this platform in rather a hurry. It's part of our Scholar platform. So our Scholar platform is a writing and assessment platform and a sort of social media platform, but we have an app within the platform called Event. So we built this rapidly in response to COVID, and it's a very nice way to build an ongoing conversation. So even when you're in the session, if you've got your laptop or your phone, open that page and please comment. The other thing is, beyond that, we have the journal and the book series. Now it's an amazing resource which over 30 years we've built up. These systematically peer-reviewed pieces in English and in Spanish. My apologies. I know there are a number of Portuguese presentations as well, but the conference is in English and Spanish. So please submit your papers afterwards. goes through peer review. We ask you folks to be peer reviewers. It's a kind of mutual obligation that we're a research network together. And over the years, we've built up a remarkable body of knowledge. When I looked the other day, it's thousands of articles and quite a few books as well. And by virtue of being members of the network, you can, with your login, access all of those. And a very important message, when you read something, cite it. You know, one of the ways in which we honour each other in an academic environment is by recognising the ideas we've picked up from other people, and the citation is a way of honouring that other person's contribution to your thinking. So please use this resource, and when you go into the bookstore tab, again in Scholar, you'll find an advanced search button. So even though there are thousands of articles, almost invariably you'll be able to find something which is very closely aligned to your interest. But I'm going to say something the opposite of that about the conference. Go to unlikely sessions. Go to sessions which are very different from what you're normally interested in. So this is a very broad interdisciplinary conference, and you will find sometimes something about something very, very distant from your interest. There's an interesting connection. So, you know, spread your wings a little bit is what I'm advising. So that's a little bit of information about the conference, so you understand the format and you understand the way in which this research network works. And also, by the way, of course, all these digital presentations you've got will be available to you indefinitely. So if there's some little idea in that session you want to go back to, there'll be a recording of it. So that's my very brief kind of introduction to the conference and how it works, and welcome. And I'm going to ask Tamara just to say a few words in Spanish for those who are not bilingual in English. As I say, Tamara works at the University of Granada, and she's one of our Spanish-speaking colleagues. So just a few words of welcome from Tamara.
Buenos días, una cálida bienvenida a todos a este 30º Congreso Internacional sobre Aprendizaje. Estamos aquí, en total 400 personas, 230 en persona y un poco menos en modalidad online. Estamos celebrando este congreso en la Universidad de San Paulo, que nos ha dado una cálida acogida aquí en esta fantástica universidad. Y este congreso se celebra en 3 idiomas, en inglés, en español y en portugués. Espero que disfruten del congreso y espero que también revisen el contenido digital de los participantes que han subido su contenido. Nos están viendo online, pero también quieren compartir sus investigaciones y que también pues, disfruten de sus trabajos. Muchísimas gracias y que disfruten de estas jornadas.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Well, it's my great pleasure now to hand over to our host from the University of Sao Paulo, and I'm going to start with our wonderful colleague, Valkyria Montemor.
Okay. Morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone. You know, I'm really, really very happy that you are all here, that we are together in this conference to exchange ideas. I'm Valkyria Montemor. I'm the local host, together with the other colleagues, okay, here. Rodrigo, that has just left, okay, the table. She's going to talk to you for a while as well. This is Dr. Marília Ferreira, also a colleague of ours. That is Dr. Daniel Ferraz, also from our university, and Dr. Ana Paula Duboc as well. We are all from the same local committee, right? So this is the reason why I'd like to mention their names. But okay, I'm in contact. I'm in touch with those. Very dear colleagues, Bill and Mary, for a while now. We've been having some partnership also in research and other activities that has been very, very interesting. And I became very interested in this kind of partnership and friendship, I think, better say, because I've been involved in the idea of a critical education. I've co-founded. Yes, I'm always scared of changing co-founded by co-funded, because that would be scary to me, you know. Sorry, so it's co-founded. A nationwide project on literacies and critical literacies, and we started in 2009, and I myself, together with my colleague Lynn Mario Menezes de Souza, we have coordinated this project for a long time. And nowadays we have the other new directors that are Dr. Daniel Ferraz and Dr. Ana Paula Duboc. So they are the new directors of this nationwide project now. And I'm going to be around, you know, not going to leave it this way. So actually, I'm very, very happy that we can hold this kind of event and talk to friends, especially in South America, right? And this is the reason why we thought it would be great to have this kind of space, virtual space as well, to exchange ideas and to exchange research, and we could talk and also make friends probably as well, you know, during our breaks. And I would like to welcome everybody. I hope that you really have a very good time and that you take and we also take together very good insights, okay, in this conference. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to ask Mary, right, to say hello to you as well, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Will it stretch or do I have to stand up?
Okay.
I have to stand up.
Before, right?
Oh, move over.
I think that's about it.
Oh, okay, can stretch. All right. So, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be here and how long we've waited to be here. And I first want to thank all of you, the participants who are here, because without you, it doesn't matter what we do. If you guys don't turn up, and gals, we don't have a conference. And I think Valkyria is very correct. It's about rebuilding our relationships. We've waited after the COVID when we weren't able to get together in person, and here we are in person and online to do the sorts of things that motivate us. And I want to say, first of all, bom dia. Did I get it right? Thank you. Thank you. And if you're Greek, kalimera. If you're Australian, good day. And if you're American, howdy. I don't know anything. I don't know any of the other languages. So forgive me. But we are a multicultural community, and it really matters that we are diverse, that we bring different languages with us. As Bill said, this is the 30th. Believe it, 30th. He was right. We were babies when we started this because we're still young. But this is our 30th conference. We started it in Australia 30 years ago to bring together an international community, because every national set of problems and challenges has something comparable elsewhere. And if we don't come together to resolve those issues or learn about them, then the world will not improve in the way that we want it to. So it was always to have professors and students and politicians and people together, to meet together, to talk together about these important issues. But Brazil is very important to us. Of all the countries that we've gone to, Brazil is really special to us. We've been coming here for 12 years, over those 12 years with different conferences, strong collegiality amongst us, strong collaborations, publishing, writing, supervising students together, and also, as Valkyria said, becoming friends, because I think there's a relationship between passion, purpose, scholarship, and friendship. If there's friendship, you're going to go that extra mile. And of course, with that is aspirations for justice, for equality, for our shared humanity. And without breaking bread together, drinking coffee together, our shared humanity is just too abstract. So I'm sorry that we take so long to go to these introductions, but they matter as much as everything else that you're going to hear. So I do want to thank Danielle Ferraz and Ana Paula Duboc and Marilla Ferreira for all they've done here, because we come in, we fly in an aeroplane, beautiful venue, you notice, no steps, You know, this is for wheelchairs and, you know, ramps outside, beautiful design, wonderful facilities. We get to see what this university does ahead of the world, really, in preparation. And, you know, Valkyria Montemor and Lidmara de Souza are warriors. They've been warriors for justice, warriors for literacy, warriors for the ecology, warriors for Indigenous peoples and culture. They're not just academics. They're internationally known, and it's such a privilege for us to have been with them for so long. And we took pictures with the bamboo many years ago. Take pictures in front of the bamboo. Very strong. And I also want to say, as a consequence, and this is the Sao Paulo folks, we have a number of people who've come to Illinois, to our university, as a consequence. Helena Mendoza, Elena Reis, Alessandra Fernandez, Katia Mook, Vandelay Zaki, Jalini, Ferreras, Vania Castro, and Peterson Pinero. It was from this relationship that they ended up back at the University of Illinois, and we welcome any of you who want to be visiting scholars with us. And also we have virtual, we run a research lab, and Rodrigo Abrantes da Silva and Eduardo Mura are part of that research lab, and we do welcome others to join us. And of course, in the end, Bill and I come to this conference because we started it 30 years ago. But the people who really run it now is Philip Clancis Cope, Tamsin Gilbert, Jose Luis Ortega, Tamara, Tatiana, and the Common Ground team. And they've done a wonderful job. When COVID came, Philip cried. He says, "Mum, everything we've done has collapsed." But they worked so hard to recreate this hybrid, you know, the face-to-face, well, first it was virtual, and now face-to-face. And they are heroes too, and they've done, and they're kind and gentle and gracious, so I want to thank them. But in the end, as I say, it's you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you for choosing to be in person, for having the courage to travel here, and to be looking forward to relating to each other. So a heartfelt welcome and thank you to all of you.
Bom dia, buenos dias, good morning. I would like to welcome you all to the University of São Paulo and also welcome those that are connected with us online to join this wonderful conference that brings to us a very relevant discussion that connects literacy and language issues to digitality, neoliberalism in a post-pandemic world. I'm very glad to see that this scope in particular has been hosted in a global South country, because this is a theme that is of paramount importance to all of us, but in particular, I would say to those, and I myself include here, that are from global South countries, as social disparities and social injustices of all sorts have been exacerbated with the pandemic, especially in those countries affecting those people. I would like to congratulate in special Bill Cope, Mary Calensis, my beloved colleagues and friends, Valkyria Montemor, Daniel Ferraz, and all the organizing committee that has put in so much effort in making this a reality. And this is real now, as we are together to discuss, to build new knowledges, to exchange local practices, so as we are engaged in the reimagination of futures to children and young adults and adults that still need so much a qualified education to live a dignified life. Welcome to São Paulo, welcome to USP, and I wish you all a great time and a great conference. Thank you.
I have to? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Bom dia, buenos dias. Meu nome é Daniel Ferraz, and I will be very quick as well, but I'd like to say welcome to Brazil, to São Paulo, and to our University of São Paulo. All of you. And all of you online as well. Online is back there, look. And I would like to thank, a special thanks to the participants of the National Project of Literacies. Queria agradecer imensamente a participação dos nossos colegas do Projeto Nacional de Letramentos. Contamos para a Mary e para o Bill que nós encaixamos 2 eventos. Então, nós encerramos ontem 2 dias intensivos. We've just finished 2 very intensive days of the event, the 14th event, if I'm not mistaken, of the National Project of Literacies. So thank you, everybody, for being here, for continuing with us this week. I don't know if everybody knows the University of São Paulo. I'll try to speak English and Portuguese, hoping that Portuguese is helping the Spanish speakers who cannot understand English. So I don't know if you know about our university. The University of São Paulo is one of the oldest and the biggest institution, higher institution in our country. We have approximately 100,000 undergrad and graduate students. We have more than 15,000 public servants and more than 6,000, approximately 6,000 lecturers and professors. Então, muito rapidamente, queria apresentar para vocês a Universidade de São Paulo, que é uma das mais antigas e uma das maiores no Brasil. Então, sejam muito bem-vindos, bem-vindas, bem-vindes a esta casa. A gente tem 100 mil alunos de graduação e pós, quase 15 mil servidores, né? E 6 mil docentes. É com muito orgulho que a gente está aqui nessa gigante estrutura. And finally, I'd like to say a special thanks to Valkyria, of course. Valkyria was the warrior of this event. Okay, Mary? She was Valkyria and Rodrigo, so thank you very much, Valkyria, for organizing all of this, along with Rodrigo, because we were really, really worried with the National Project of Literacy, and we couldn't divide ourselves, right? So, but also I'd like to thank Dr. Mary Calantzas and Bill Cope. I think it's very important to emphasize our collaboration, and not only the efforts for putting this event together, but also this long-term academic partnership. We've learned a lot with each other. As I told you, many of my supervisees are inspired in your work, the wonderful work you've done for more than 2-3 decades. So I'm very happy to be again with you guys here. Eu agradeci, gente, só. Eu agradeci Valkyria, que junto com o Rodrigo fez essa guerreira, que a Mary chamou a Valkyria de guerreira, porque nós estávamos também organizando esses dois dias do Projeto Nacional, mas também agradecer imensamente a Mary e o Bill, que têm sido nossos parceiros de longa data, né, e a gente aprende muito uns com os outros, em diversos projetos, e eu disse para eles que eu mesmo tenho orientandos de doutorado, acho que a Luciana deve estar aí, completamente inspirada nos trabalhos dos nossos colegas Bill e Mary. Eu desejo a todos vocês um excelente evento. Aproveitem a nossa universidade, aproveitem a cidade de São Paulo também, que vale a pena. Tomem cuidado com mobile phones e etc. Tem que tomar muito cuidado, mas ainda assim é uma cidade muito bacana. Okay? So enjoy the event. I wish you a wonderful event. Enjoy the city of São Paulo and the University of São Paulo. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado. Oh, yes, and now... Yeah, because I don't know if you know, não sei se vocês conhecem, but Dr. Marília Mendes Ferreira is our coordinator. She is the coordinator of our postgraduate program, or graduate program of English Language and Literature. Professora Marília Ferreira, que coordena também um projeto enorme aqui do Laboratório de Letramento Acadêmico e é a nossa coordenadora do programa de pós-graduação em Estudos Linguísticos e Literários em Inglês. Obrigado, Marília.
Sorry, but I don't have the ability to switch languages like Danielle, because then something happens in my brain. Sorry. So I will speak in English for a little bit, be very quick. First of all, I would like to thank you all for being here. Again, as my colleague said, welcome to São Paulo, welcome to USP. Welcome to Brazil, if you're not here. And I would like to say special thank you for the coordinators abroad, Dr. Mary and Cope Calentes. They have been coming here for a long time. I've met them a long time ago, and I was just starting, I think, in the program in USP. And thank Valkyria and Danielle and Ana Duboc, for the organizers, for inviting me to be part of this opening session of the conference. And it's a shame I didn't know about this conference before. It's in this 13th edition, and with a topic, a general topic about learning, which is so important for all of us, and with timely topics, as Ana Duboc emphasized, that we need to discuss, we need to approach, we need to think after what we've been through, and always with hope, because if we are educators, if we are in learning, teaching field, we need hope, always. So welcome, bienvenidos todos en Brazil. Sorry for my Spanish, I'm still studying it. And I also would like to thank CAPES Foundation for support, for funding, partial funding of this event.
Ana Paula? Okay.
I don't know, Bill, would you like to say?
Would you like just to say to closer? No. Oh, this is part of the local organization. We are still organizing, and we'll keep organizing during the event, okay? So, okay, now Ana Paula is going to...
Everybody's leaving.
I don't know if you know it, but we tended to like informal relationships here, informal talks as well.
After you finish.
So feel comfortable with that, right?
You need.
At the end.
Okay.
So thank you for the colleagues to open this conference. And now it's time for us to start with the first plenary session. But first, I have some information from the organizing committee. They kindly ask you not to leave this room as soon as the session is over, okay? Because they do have very important information concerning the location of rooms and the like, okay? Yeah, so don't leave the room, okay? You might leave the room, yeah, for lunch, etc. I think I'm gonna sit, okay, Jessica? And then let's start with the first plenary session with Dr. Jessica Zacher Pandya. Jessica Pandya is Dean and Professor in the College of Education at California State University, Dominguez Hills, a former kindergarten teacher in the California Bay Area who received her Ph.D. at UC Berkeley. Her research focuses on children's literacy and identity work in diverse urban classrooms. Prior to coming to the center, Dr. Pandya served as chair of the Academic Senate, chair of the Liberal Studies Department, and Pandya was a foundation for child development, New American Children Young Scholar, and has extensively researched children's literacy practices. She is currently a partner investigator on the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child, and her latest books are Exploring Critical Digital Literacy Practices, Everyday Video in a Dual Language Context, and she also co-edited this beautiful handbook of critical literacies. Jessica will be delivering a talk entitled Transnational Critical Literacies in a Post-Pandemic World. Jessica, thank you so much. The stage is yours.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ana. Can you folks hear me all right? All right. I'm going to speak only in English, so hablo español, pero muy mejor en inglés, I think. So I feel like you're a captive audience since you're not allowed to leave the room, so we'll see how long I can keep you. I'm joking, I promise. Let's see. I have to have a plan of the talk so that I don't lose my own way. So I'm going to welcome folks a little bit and thank you. And then I'm going to talk briefly about myself and my own literacy journey, and thinking a little bit about what is critical literacy and why does it matter and why might it matter at a conference on learning. And then I'm going to talk very briefly about critical digital literacies in the US context, focusing on some of my own research. Then I'm going to talk, the majority of the time I'll spend with you today will be talking about the Transnational Critical Literacies Network, as well as the handbook that Anna mentioned. And then I'll end with some questions and conclusions and future work, and those questions are meant to foster a discussion here after my talk, as well as throughout the conference. So again, thanks very much. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. This is a practice we do in the US and in many other countries. I don't know well enough the native peoples of the Sao Paulo region, but I'm going to talk about the land where I work and live. So I acknowledge that the land on which I work and I wrote this talk is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Tongva Gabrieleño peoples in Southern California. Today I come with respect and gratitude for the Tongva elders and descendants as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. I recognize the legacy of violence, settlement, and displacement these people forcibly suffered and survived. This acknowledgement demonstrates my responsibility and commitment to healing and reconciliation. I'm grateful for the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. I also have to put thank yous, but I have to write them down because otherwise I'll forget to name people. So thank you to Dr. Bill Cope, Valkyria Montemor, and Mary Calensis for this invitation to be here today. I'm very excited. It's my first time in South America and my first time in Brazil. And to Daniel Ferraz and Ana Paula Duboc, and also to Tatiana and Tamara, who are here and who have been very helpful in getting me here and getting me to this particular place and making sure that I'm awake and in front of you. So thank you. As Ana mentioned, I was a kindergarten teacher in San Francisco not that long ago, in my mind anyway. And this is a photo I have just to show you a little bit of the context that I first began working in as a teacher. You can see me there. I'm white. Very white sometimes, and you know, but I've always worked in environments with children and adults who are very diverse. So here you can see in this picture, there's an African American young girl. There's a young girl who's white, although later she claimed a Latina identity. I'll talk about that in a second. And then there are 3 girls who you would maybe identify in the U.S. as Latina, although their parents came from 3 different Central American countries to live in San Francisco. I did my first research project that I'll talk about in a minute with these children when they were a bit older. But what I wanted to look at today in this particular photo is actually this wall. You know, I've been thinking about literacies and educational changes my whole educational career, my whole professional career, I should say. And I am struck, and many of you probably have been in classrooms or taught in classrooms where there are words all over the walls and where there's writing and where you have children's words and children's writing and your own writing. So I was very much a teacher who was reading. I had read Frary before. I'll talk about him in just a moment. And you know, I had literacy and words everywhere, and I like to just remind myself that this is where I began, and where I began thinking about these literacies was with actual 5- and 6-year-olds writing down the words that were in their lives and were important to them. Okay, I'm going to talk very briefly about my own past, just so you have some context. Who is this person in front of you? I don't know. When I first did my dissertation work, I was really curious about how children created identities through their literacy practices. So I've been thinking, and I only have these publications up here because I've been thinking about it, I don't know, since 2002 or something like that. How are literacies and identities connected? And I did this in my dissertation, but I keep writing about it because, as you all know, those of you who are writing in one language or another, or you're writing yourself, or you're writing to think about yourself, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And those kids whose pictures you saw, I was thinking about how they, in a very diverse context, narrate their identities and themselves. So I think these are still questions in my mind, but not what I'm focused on these days. After I wrote about identity and literacy a lot, I did a new project. And so after my dissertation, as one often does, you start a new project. And I did a project in a school in California that was 99% of the students were English learners. And they were all Spanish background students. So they all spoke Spanish at home and came to a school where English was mandated and where a curriculum, particular, very structured curriculum was mandated. And I spent a year or 2 at that school writing this book and writing about in what ways mandated school literacy programs affect children's learning. And this is still a question that is with me. I'm just curious to get a show of hands. How many of you live in states or countries where there's a mandated curriculum that teachers must follow? Okay, yeah. So this is still a pressing question. And of those of you who raise your hands, how many of those curricular mandates are very tight and teachers are required to follow the curriculum on a weekly basis, or teachers have public check-ins about their curriculum? Oh, okay, I see some hands. Okay, interesting. That was the case here. Teachers had to be on the curriculum week by week. So after investigating and exploring this for some time, I then began to move towards critical literacies, partly because as a sort of my own professional reaction towards mandates and the particular mandates which led to a really reductive perspective on reading and literacy. So I was reading Frary in 1995, which is later than many of you, but earlier than many of my US colleagues, while earning my teaching credential and while working in doing family literacy and literacy circles. And then I was lucky enough to keep rereading Frary and Miles Horton. I don't know if folks know Miles Horton's work, but he's a sort of, not a US equivalent by any means, but a partner with Frary, and they wrote a great book, We Make the Road by Walking. It's actually interview transcripts with the two of them talking about their own literacy journeys. And it affected greatly the way I think about critical literacy. I was lucky enough to meet Alan Luke in the early 2000s and write for him, and he became and still is a mentor of mine, although now instead of sending me academic articles, he sends me songs that he writes. Retirement. And Barbara Comer, who is still one of my great mentors and who does a lot of work in critical literacy, and I've been editing their work for a fairly long time, or asking them to write for me and then editing to a small degree. In 2010, I started a project with Juliana Avila, who is at University of North Carolina, Charlotte, about critical digital literacies. And we actually said, nobody's writing about this phrase, critical digital literacies. What's different about the digital in critical literacy? We were also doing a project on critical literacy, an edited collection. And so we started talking about this. And she and I actually just wrote another piece about this after the pandemic. So what do we still not understand about this phrase, critical digital literacies? So I'm going to talk a little more about that today. And in 2012, I'll speak briefly about this. I started my own critical digital literacies project because I had enough of mandated literacy curriculum, and I wanted to make things with children. I wanted to be in classrooms with teachers actually producing and making instead of watching mandates. And while I was doing that project, I was also working with my colleague Earl Aguilera, who teaches at CSU Fresno, and other folks at AERA, which is the big educational conference in America, and a pedagogy special issue. So I've just been writing and thinking about critical literacies, and one of the things that I'll talk about today is just how generative this concept is for how many different people, and we'll see why in a moment. But let's see. So my latest question has been, and still kind of is, how do we do critical digital literacies? And these are some of the books. And Anna, this book on your right is the book that came out of my long-term project, Exploring Critical Digital Literacy Practices. You may know that the title says exploring. It doesn't say defining or fully understanding or I'm done with this. It just says exploring, because I think a lot of these things are practices that we just continue to explore. So now I'm going to detour into my own critical digital literacies project site for just a few minutes. And this is one of the last photos I'll show you. Unfortunately, from here on, this talk becomes more text heavy. There'll be lots of text on your screen. I apologize in advance for my own text heaviness. But here, just a photograph. So I did this ethnographic study of kids' literacy practices and digital making. And it was a design-based project. We did 9 cycles of video making over 4 years. So we worked with kids. These are kids at this school site I worked with. They had an iPad, and they would work together. They would make videos. And we, as a research team, me and several students, would collect their videos and collect all kinds of data. And we would, after each cycle, we'd work with the teachers and say, okay, what did you like about making those videos? What would you do differently? And how would you do this differently? So I think now is maybe a good time to actually say what I mean when I say critical literacy. It might be helpful for you all. And to do it, I'm going to quote other people. So Alan Luke writes that critical literacy is a process of naming and renaming the world, seeing its patterns, designs, and complexities, and developing the capacity to design and reshape it. That's why I think it's still is with me after all this time, because we're always renaming our worlds, and we're always seeing new patterns, and we're always attempting to have capacities to redesign and reshape our worlds. Critical literacy is also, and this is a sort of older set of definitions from Mitzi Lewison and colleagues, with 4 different definitions of critical literacy. And this is actually from an article about critical literacy for novices. So they define it in 4 ways: disrupting the commonplace, interrogating multiple viewpoints, focusing on socio-political issues, and taking action and promoting social justice. And when I used to teach future teachers, this were a set of definitions that really helped them understand that you could try critical literacy activities. You might just end up in one of these places. And generally speaking, I would say new teachers end up in the first and the second places. Or maybe the third. Maybe they focus on socio-political issues. But the taking action and promoting social justice pieces I find to be more difficult for teachers in America than the other pieces. I'll talk about that more in a minute. When I say critical digital literacies, and here I'm quoting my colleague Juliana, I say activities and practices that lead to the creation and revision of digital texts that interrogate the world. Critical digital literacies also encourage and develop the interrogation of digital multimedia texts, incorporating an element of critical reflection to further engagement. And I've had some lively exchanges with Juliana Avila here about this definition and what I like about it and what I don't like about it, but I think it's useful for talk and as a discussion point. So maybe we can talk a little bit about this later if folks here have augmentations to this definition. So I'll just say a little more about my project and share one finding with you. So I said children made videos with me for 4 years, and I was documenting and analyzing new critical practices as they emerged from kids' engagement. I just want to focus on one little cycle here, and I don't want to show you a video. I often show kids videos, but out of context they're a little hard to understand, especially when it's a video made by like a 9-year-old on an iPad in a loud classroom. So what I'm going to show you instead is just some comments. So we did this video cycle called A Day in the Life. It was centered around Cesar Chavez Day in the US, which is a celebration of the rights of workers. And the teachers wanted to have kids focus on work and jobs and what people did. So we asked children to interview someone who had a job about a day in their life and their daily routine. And we also said you could interview any adult, any person who has a daily routine. So some people did interview parents who stayed home or cousins who went to college or something like that. But they interviewed folks, and then they created a video based on their interview to show their classmates and their families and their interviewees. And I'm not going to talk about it today, but I've spent a long time thinking about audience. So what is it you do with a video that a child makes? Who's the audience for that video? Because children aren't making things in a vacuum, even in a classroom, but especially when you're making a video that you might share more broadly. So these kids were making videos, and they knew that their audience would be the people who they had interviewed. Afterwards, the team and I surveyed and interviewed child composers about their videos, and we asked, and this was the research question around this specific project, in what ways do children's representations of other people's lives, as reported and as seen in our analyses of videos, index potential critical digital literacy practices? So this is a question that I find quite difficult to answer, actually, and for those of you who've done work with children, I think Barbara Comer's work in Australia with children and teachers around critical literacy practices shows lots of examples of different critical literacy practices. I think we didn't go far enough, and I'll show you why in just a minute. So one of the questions we asked kids was, what was something you learned about your subject? We didn't say your subject, we said your mom or your aunt's work and life from making this video. And some answers to share with you. Elena said, it's complicated. There's lots of stuff when you get older. So we all know, lots of stuff. Javier said, she really likes her friends. Okay. Alejandro said, knowing how hard it is to be Rosa was a teacher, because she has to wake up really early in the morning and work really late. And it is true, actually. Rosa had to work 2 jobs to afford her apartment in this city because it's an expensive city to live in. So she was a teacher, and then she did after school to make ends meet. And then this Diana said, for us kids, you get to play, but for adults, you have to work and work and work with only 2 days of break. Yes. And the videos that go with these are actually kind of funny in terms of how kids represented work and money. But I'm going to stop talking about this project here now, but what I want to say is what this indexes to me is maybe interrogating multiple viewpoints. So the children were able to see the world from someone else's perspective and understand it, which is, I think, an aspect of critical literacy or one approach to it. But these were 8, 9, 10-year-olds, I should mention that, but they weren't saying, and we should engage in some discussions about teacher salaries and pay equity, and so they weren't going on to political action or social action, and they weren't there. And maybe that's a function of age, but I don't think so. It's partly a function of making things in schools with children. So teachers will go so far and have the capacity to go so far, and then you've got to move on to the next unit. You've got to move on to the next thing, and it's sometimes difficult to go past multiple viewpoints. So this is something that sits with me still. So I'm curious to hear in our discussions about folks who've worked with children to go further in their critical literacies. But now I'm going to turn to the Transnational Critical Literacies Network. I have been paying no attention to the time, but I'm assuming we're maybe halfway. Okay. This is a logo made by my dear friend and colleague Raul Alberto Mora. Maybe some of you here know Raul. I think everyone knows Raul, I feel. Someone said yesterday. So in 2018 or so, Raul and I and a few other people, I'll share their pictures in a minute, started this Transnational Critical Literacies Network. It didn't have this logo when we started it. It just had a Google Doc. And the goal of this was actually similar to what Valkyria and Lynn Maria have done here, which was to share critical literacy ideas, names, places, research, writing, needs, conferences, and more, but with folks internationally. And I think we have 158 members, because every time somebody talks about it, there's a Google link. I'll share the link with you all later if you'd like it. You can sign up yourself. It's just a Google Doc that has people's names, emails, photographs, websites, and what are you interested in. So you can go back through and you can, if you're visiting another country, you can look for everybody from that country. You can email them and say, hey, I'm in town. Can we talk about your critical literacies project? People actually do that. The last two things that have happened out of this network were think tanks, and you see the locations of these. I'll talk more about this in a minute, but at the American Educational Research Association in April, and then at the UK Literacy Association. So I never know what's next. I didn't found this network as something to own, but as something to see what happened. And to clarify, in my day job as a dean, I often have to own things. So it's fun to create things that other people can own and we can all own together and just see what happens. So these are the five of us who Raul calls these the founding five. This is me and Raul Mora from UPB Medellin, although he's now temporarily in Norway. Jennifer Alford, who's at Griffith University in Australia. Noah Golden, who is at California State University Long Beach. And Roberto Santiago de Rook, who, when we founded this, was at Nanyang Institute of Education in Singapore, and now is at UC Santa Cruz. And I have this picture here and these affiliations here, so you can see the struggle we have already with our issues of representation, and I'll talk more about that. But one of the things that, well, okay. So we created this network. We all signed up. We said, oh, we should do something together. What should we do? And we had some meetings online, and we had some talks, and some of you in this room maybe were in them. And one of the things that we said we wanted to do was to answer this question about how do we work together to learn about and advance critical literacies around the world, and really what matters about critical literacy and where and why. And one of the projects that we decided to undertake to answer these questions is this handbook that Anna mentioned, and I would have brought it, but it's kind of heavy, then I would have had to give it to somebody, so I'd have to take it home. But I'm happy to share with you. There are electronic copies of chapters. I'll talk about it in a sec. But I'm going to talk for the rest of my time here about this handbook, so I'm going to talk less about my own work and more about other people's work, although I did lead the project. It was a project with over 100 people. So I'm going to talk about this, some fundamentals here. So about over 100 authors, and that was on purpose. We wanted to be as big as we could be, I would say, and see who we could get. It was written, oh, I missed a word here, but it was written largely in the pandemic or during the pandemic. We started the project before it, and so I think for many people this was a way to stay connected during the pandemic. It was a pandemic project. We were writing, we got the contract before the pandemic, then the pandemic hit, and we said, well, we'll just keep going. So it was created out of that Transnational Critical Literacies Network, although not exclusive to it, and certainly people who wrote for us were not in the network, and some people had not actually heard of it, of course, or wouldn't even consider themselves critical literacy people, as I'll talk about in a minute. The handbook was full of tension, this project, so some of them were initial and some were born in the process. So in no particular order, there were a lot of tension around languages. All of those founding folks spoke English, but also speak some other languages. And the publisher refused to let us publish, or said they would not publish a book with chapters in different languages. But they did say we could publish native language or first language chapters online if we wanted to. So the book is in English. But one of the wins was that it was in multiple Englishes. So we said we didn't want anyone to copy edit chapters with an eye on some standard or normative English, but we wanted to allow authors to write in the English that they wanted to write in. And there were other tensions. This one was even to publish a book at all, and to publish a book at all with a global press like Routledge, because And this may be something folks in Brazil in particular are familiar with, but many academics around the world don't need to publish books, book chapters, and they don't need to publish them in for-profit or non-profit presses. They want to use their national peer-reviewed publication systems. So some folks said, I don't really want to do that. I don't really need to do that. And there was no pressure to do it, but we did have a lot of discussions about this with people saying, why do it in a press and why do it in this format? And I think the reason we did do it was so that we had this artifact to share, again, with some tensions. We had a goal for no author to write alone, to pair junior and senior scholars together purposefully, although most of us who were editors were kind of middle level or junior scholars, so we kind of paired up and down. The idea being, and I was talking in the lobby earlier with some folks about this, but the idea being that, the academy is a difficult place to become a scholar, and as we know in the era of Me Too, and the more we hear about older advisors and how advisors work with younger graduate students and what it's like to be a graduate student and then be alone in the field, our goal was to make folks not feel alone and to form connections and sometimes to force them. So I did have to send some emails that said things like, hi, you've never met this person, but I'd like you to write a chapter with them, which, worked out most of the time, I have to say. And then another thing I'll say is that critical literacy, the uses of it, the purposes, the definitions, there's a phrase in America, your mileage may vary, which means like you might get different things out of it. And I think that was definitely the case here, as I'll show you in a few minutes, in terms of what people even think when they think of the phrase critical literacy. And as I said, there were 5 of us who were editors. We represent in the beginning 4 countries, 3 in the end, but we were always asking who is left out. And this is a question that plagues me in most of my daily life. Who am I not talking to? Who is not involved in this project that could be or should be? This is a picture of the geography of the chapters and of the regions, countries and regions that we cover and don't cover in this handbook. And so I think it's pretty clear who is left out and where they're left out. We had very few authors from Africa, with the exception of South Africa, where there's a long critical literacy tradition. South America, other than Colombia and Brazil, we couldn't find folks. Parts of South Asia, parts of Central Europe and the Middle East and Eastern Europe. So you can see some of the gaps there in what we know and don't know. Oh, okay. So what I wanted to, this is an odd thing to do, but Arlette Willis, who's a professor in the U.S., wrote these questions after reading the handbook, and I thought they would be a nice introduction to you for it, better than I could say myself. But she is asking readers in a particular context, what kinds of connections can you envision among epistemologies, ontologies, axiologies, and the research process? And this was a question we kept asking our authors. And she writes that we can also, this is what we're trying to do in this handbook, that's why I'm quoting her here. We can also learn to decenter whiteness and discard the colonialist stance towards the literacies of non-Eurocentric and non-English dominant people. It'll take work as we learn to value and center Africana, Arab and Muslim, Asian, Latinx, Native American and indigenous epistemologies. And we must learn to move beyond the white gaze and produce critical and socially just literacy. Is this possible? Is it realistic in modern society? And I am well aware that I'm a white person with my own white gaze talking about decentering whiteness, so I think that's one of the interesting tensions for me to even be here talking with you in South America about critical literacy in a country with a very strong tradition. But I don't think that those tensions mean that I shouldn't and other folks shouldn't be talking about these things. We should be talking together. I can't decenter my own gaze on my own, right? So we need to work together to do what Willis is talking about here. This handbook itself had 3 areas. One was a sort of a critical literacies over time, antecedents, and current configurations, and I edited that section. The section I'm going to talk about today is to do with critical literacies across space, a global survey of critical literacy praxis. And the third one was pushing the boundaries, critical literacies in motion, and this is where you get stuff like embodiment and transliteracies and the kind of the current research phrasings that people might talk about more are in that section. But I'm going to talk about Area 2, which was edited by Roberto and Raul, and there were 22 chapters in it. I'm going to run through them so you can see what people were writing about and how they titled their chapters, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the contents of those chapters. And this is alphabetical, so Aotearoa, New Zealand, Australia, made in Brazil, written by, you guys can raise your hands, I don't know where you are, Daniel and Valkyria, wrote that chapter. And these are brief chapters, but I'll tell you more about theirs in a minute. Canada, Colombia, India, Indonesia, Iran, Tour de Horizon, Japan, Mexico, Puerto Rico. So you'll see countries and you'll see territories and regions as well. Russia, Singapore, South Africa, the United Kingdom, US, the Caribbean Isles, Hong Kong and mainland China. There was a tension in that chapter just in terms of should those two places even be in the same chapter. Benji, who wrote it, has a lot to say about that. Finland and Norway, Norway and France, South Asia, and the Uganda and Congo. So these were the chapters that we had folks writing about. And what I want to do in the remainder of my time with you is kind of just, I have pulled out little chunks from the chapters to share. And so we asked authors to write in the same structure. We said everybody needs to have a brief overview of the geographical space in its socio-political context. I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit of a magpie, so I know like lots of little things about different countries' socio-political contexts, but I don't know enough about any country to write. Rather, even my own country, I wrote the US chapter with 2 other people, and I had to think carefully about what I would say in this. So I'm going to quote a little bit. This is the chapter from Brazil, and I've just underlined where the chapters are, but I want to just, for you folks to see this. So about Brazil, they write, as the largest country in Latin America at 8.5 million square kilometers, with over 211 million people, Brazil is formed by a rich, multicultural, multilingual society as a result of its colonial past, marked by the presence of indigenous peoples, enslaved Africans, and European settlers. So the reason well, I'll just keep reading, and maybe the reasons for my choices will become clear. This is a section from Singapore, and I tried to juxtapose some interesting sections for you. But you'll see, spanning over 720 square kilometers of land with few natural resources and little primary industry, Singapore has defined itself as a service, information, digital economy driven by educational development and investment. A former British colony, it's transformed rapidly into a developed, largely middle-class society that punches above its weight in the global economy. So, you know, should you read through these or talk more about transnational approaches or thinking about critical literacy across spaces, you'll see that wide variety of socio-political contexts. Of course, post-colonial countries, many of these countries were post-colonial countries or territories, or frankly still colonial in the case of Puerto Rico and some others. But people have very different approaches to discussing those histories and those presents. Okay. So then we asked folks to talk about the educational systems in their country. Also kind of complicated. If anybody here wants to try a little writing exercise, try writing in 800 words a description of the educational system of your country. It's harder than you'd think. And some of these, you know, every time I read them, and I was not the editor for this section, but I read most of these chapters as an editor, as a sort of a third editor. I learned and kept learning. So in Puerto Rico, for instance, after the U.S. invasion of 1898, a military government imposed an educational system in Puerto Rico through the Departamento de Instrucción Pública. As part of the larger agenda of Americanization for Puerto Rico, instruction was mandated and modeled after the U.S. school system. More than a century later, teachers, parents, and students continue protesting policies that have been detrimental to the schools and students. So, you know, I hadn't known this before, but the Puerto Rican educational system, over 100 years, it's just been modeled on other countries. We all may be familiar with that concept. And in Norway and France, both educational systems aspire to promote democratic values and culture. Many countries may actually say that that's what their educational systems try to do, I would say. And to function as inclusive arenas that ensure equal opportunities for all students. Yeah, actually, you could probably copy and paste that in many places, many around the world. But some contextual detail that's interesting here is that in France, teacher recruitment is centralized and teachers are assigned to schools following a national competitive exam. Whereas in Norway, school principals hire their own staff through a public process. So you get a sense of the variation of how systems are run. The next thing we asked folks to do was to do a survey of critical literacy work in their countries. And this is where things got very interesting. Because as I said, critical literacy means lots of different things to different people. And I'm taking some liberties with quoting here. So this is the chapter from Japan. We illustrate 2 modes of criticality in literacy education in Japan. Critical reading based on a critical thinking approach, which actually is what many people think about when they hear about critical literacy. And critical literacy that resonates with the Freirean school of thought. While the former is oriented towards objectivity, the latter emphasizes the centrality of subjectivity in the reading of the objective word. And this chapter actually focuses entirely on reclaiming subjectivity in Japanese approaches to literacy teaching. In Colombia, critical literacy, the many authors of the Colombian chapter divide critical literacy approaches in Colombia into 2 groups, community involvement and interrogating instructional practices as part of social transformation being one arm of the critical literacy work, and then critical literacy as disruption, including disruption as deeper meaning making and as inclusive of larger topics and alternative texts and modes. So people took the opportunity where possible to do reviews of literature throughout their countries, and like the Brazilian chapter and the Colombian chapter. There's so much work in critical literacy in some countries that you could do analyses of the country, and in other places, very little work. And I want to share this about from the chapter on Uganda and Congo. Again, things that I did not know from my white American perspective. But in formerly colonized African countries, the incongruence between Eurocentric curricula and local realities make students victims of text rather than its agents or producers. Uganda has experienced difficulties in critical, creative, and performative arts due to the political environment. Today, writers have been imprisoned for things like, quote, insulting the president. So it's hard to be politically active in many places, as you may know, when you can be imprisoned for it. But radical efforts which lay the foundation for valorizing African funds of knowledge and revolutionizing African curricula and interpretive lenses were exerted after the wave of independence. So 30 years in Africa with lots of work produced in the works of African writers such as Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and conceptual contributions have also come from Africa. For instance, orature was coined and preferred to oral literature, or oracy, and it was deemed more contextually appropriate to African indigenous literatures. So again, this is a different approach to and discussion of what critical literacy means in the African context, which is very useful. Oh yeah, I'm good. Almost done here. So we asked people to talk about their visions for more transnational work as part of this, and that was also interesting because not all of us have visions for transnational work. Some of us are happy doing what we're doing in our country, and some of us may want to do other things but may need more help or support. So this is me and Cheryl McLean and Cynthia Lewis writing. The challenge of writing our section in our chapter on the United States revealed the ways that scholars of critical literacy in the U.S. have been oriented towards, and frequently cite research by white English-speaking colleagues from Australia, the UK, Canada, and South Africa. Our vision is that we break away from these predominantly white English-oriented perspectives. And ours was a call to action for a field that looks through and thinks from many lenses. And that's actually part of what this handbook is aiming to do. In the South Asian chapter, Pramod Shah and Prem Fayak write, it's important too to focus on collaborative approaches, building on local contexts and complexities to develop the actions that address local needs. Since the region has diverse sociopolitical issues, a one-size-fits-all approach to critical literacy may not work. This approach involves collaboration between scholars within and outside the country. And I think this is a practice that many folks echo. Obviously, Bill and Mary were thinking about this when they began the Learner Conference 30 years ago. How do we work together across our countries? Sorry, stress. The last thing we asked folks about was to tell us what is our social responsibility as academics. And again, this came out of the Transnational Critical Literacies Network. Let's not just write a book, but let's write a book where we actually say what we're responsible for. What are we socially responsible to, other than publishing and presenting for conferences, and so we can get our tenure and our promotion. And here I'm going to quote the South African group. This is just Hilary Jenks and Carolyn McKinney. They said we had 4 responsibilities. Critically educate teachers with a sense of ethical responsibility to strive for equity and social justice. As teachers, we need to support students in their struggles to achieve justice. We need to conduct research that contributes to better educational outcomes for all young people. And then we need to conduct advocacy work that puts the typical African language-speaking child at the center. This is in the case in South Africa. The launch of the Bualit Collective in South Africa, I don't know if you know about the Bualit Collective, you can read about it online, is an example of the use of social media to raise awareness about the current limitation in literacy education and advocate for change. In fact, the South Africans do a lot of work elevating the work of young people because, as you well know, young folks are happy to use social media to advocate for change in ways that we as academics aren't always. The last quote I want to give you is from the chapter in Russia. Academics must become active practitioners of critical literacy in their everyday work, as well as promote their research output. It's true, sometimes some folks are better at promoting their own research than others. I don't know if you know that, if you're one of those folks who's happy to share all of your work, or if you're kind of quiet about it. But if you're doing work on critical literacy, you got to share it. And you also have to be an active practitioner in your own work, thinking about how you use text and what you do with texts. The wealth of Russian thought, in the case of Russia, must be appraised, and foreign experiences carefully assessed and contextually applied, if feasible. I like this last sentence. You need to know your own context, and you need to consider and carefully assess and apply things only as they are contextually relevant. So I've been talking very fast, but what I'm aiming to do is show you that I think what I have been trying to do with this handbook and with this network, to the extent that I do anything on my own in it, is to get folks to think together about where we go next. And I'm going to end with some questions. Oh, I'm going to skip this. This is talking about, well, yeah, I'm going to skip this. I'm going to just ask you some questions to get us going for our questions. So why does critical literacy matter to us now? I have too many questions, so pardon me, but I'll say them all. What kinds of literacies are being pushed, legislated, and denied in your own contexts? And how can critical literacy tools and practices help literacy researchers navigate these contexts? What have you done that other folks might not know about that they might use as they're advocating for change? What can we as a community of literacy researchers interested in the ways digital learning, neoliberalism, and our local literacies are currently colliding learn from each other? And that's what I'm hoping to do in the next few days here, learn from you all. In which contexts, here in Brazil and South America and further widening circles, are literacy researchers and policymakers working together on expansive critical literacies agendas? And what policymakers care about those outcomes? I live in a place where there's a lot of critical literacy work going on, but the degree to which researchers and policymakers work together is rather small. And what projects are left undone, and whose and what literacy practices are left unresearched? What don't we know, and who don't we know it about, and who's the we that I'm talking about? Those are the questions I want to leave you with. And I'm done there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for such thought-provoking talk. I'm sure that we have lots of questions and reflections that were provoked by your talk. Well, we do have some time for questions, and while we prepare, I don't have a questions, but I would just like to make a comment quite quickly. Your talk made me wondering that, well, first of all, in Brazil, just for you to have some statistical numbers, the number of children between 6 and 7 years old who don't know how to read and write has increased to 66.3% in 2021. So that means in numbers that more than 2 million children in Brazil don't know how to read and write. And the ones suffering these consequences most are the poor, the black, the indigenous, the migrant, the vulnerable groups. So who is left out in literacy practices in a post-pandemic world? The second aspect that your talk made me think is in times when there has been a boom of new digital apps that focuses on literacy education, and that somehow echo behaviorist orientation to learning. Who is once again left out? And what is the place of critique in times when there is this gamification that is not critical and political, but quite repetitive? What kind of subjects are we educating? And the third one is in times when there is this science of reading movement in a back to phonics orientation in Brazil, in America, elsewhere. And a back to phonics that is supported by new conservative, new liberal governments, and families don't know about it, and literacy teachers don't know about it, or those that know are forced to use to this phonics orientation again. So who is left out once again? So your wonderful project that deals with critical digital literacy is fantastic. It's more than necessary, yeah, and it's even more necessary as we see this importance of relating critique, equity, and social justice, yeah. So we need more of this. Thank you so much. And then I'll open to questions if you have. There's a microphone here that Thais might help. Let's open for some discussion. Do we have questions? Valkyria, please.
Thank you for your talk, Jessica. Yeah, can you hear? Yeah. So thank you. I also loved Ana Paula's comments on that. Do you think you'd like to make any other would you like to say something about those comments, Jessica, to us? Maybe I would like to. This is a very interesting time for exchanging our experiences and our knowledge from our locals, right? So I'm really looking forward to it. So this is the reason why I'd like to know about, from you and also from the others, what you think, how you see that, right?
Valkyria,
Good idea?
Valkyria, I'll say one thing in response to what Anna said. The last project I started before I became a dean, where I don't actually get to do very much research on my own, but I'm still involved in a collaborative way, is a project on platform pedagogies and the platforms that teachers use. So, and these include apps and all of the learning apps, and we actually have a policy brief coming out for the National Council of Teachers of English in the US about literacy platforms and how teachers navigate those platforms. I can count probably 12 platforms that I work on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And you all probably the same thing, from your learning management systems to your apps that you use to communicate with teachers and parents. And so there is so much going on there, and I'm hoping to hear what other people are talking about that at the conference here too, in terms of how we navigate these platform pedagogies and these platforms while thinking critically about them.
Valkyria, do you have your question or over there?
Pessoal, vocês podem fazer
Okay.
perguntas em espanhol,
I
português.
know.
You can ask questions in Portuguese, Spanish. Not in Greek, please.
No Greek. We can do French too.
Buenos días.
Mary can do Greek, yeah. Mary can.
Buenos días. Buenos días, soy de Puerto Rico. Ok, hablo despacio. Bien, primero felicitarla por la conferencia. Segundo, doy fe, y esto por lo que ella presentó, sobre cómo influye el que el país sea colonizado con la educación. Realmente nosotros lo vivimos diariamente. Y sí, la influencia es muy grande. Hablamos español y somos colonizados por el Estados Unidos, o sea, habla inglés. Entonces tenemos una mezcla del inglés y el español tan difícil que muchas personas de la América Latina nos visitan en Puerto Rico y no entienden el Spanglish, como le llaman, ¿verdad? De la influencia y la identidad que es tan difícil y tan importante para uno identificarse como país. Eso, como mencionó aquí la educadora, ¿nombre? Jessica, es muy, muy cierto. Quisiera que usted luego hablar para que usted me comparta el estudio que usted realizó sobre Puerto Rico. Muchas gracias.
Most of it.
Yeah, one more question and then. Do you need some translation? I kind of understood. No, it was a comment.
Yeah, I understood.
It connects coloniality and literacy. Importance of
Good morning to everyone.
colonial.
My name is Eric. I'm from Mexico. So my question is going to be in Spanish. En México tenemos una cultura referente a la educación que se le llama humanista. ¿Cuál es la diferencia entre la alfabetización crítica y la humanista? Porque hay muchas situaciones que se parecen y que pudiera a lo mejor tener como que ciertas ambigüedades. Gracias.
Nós vamos responder essas duas e aí nós fazemos uma outra rodada, Ana. We're going to answer these two questions and then we are going to do it again. Can we do that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Is it?
these two questions and then two more questions. Is it?
No,
is it possible?
Is that possible?
Or we add one more question and then.
There are
you
two more
do-
questions. What do you guys prefer?
Okay. Yes. Please.
We continue then?
Yes.
Okay. I have to answer them all at the end. Okay.
First one was a comment.
Well, comment.
Yeah, so we have two more questions then. I'm writing down two.
Yeah, okay, I'm writing down. We can answer them together.
Hola.
And this, hola. This also in this.
Don't worry, be happy. My first language is Quechua. Kankunapak shunguta. Kankunapak shunguta. Ajista education chaskingapach. But my second language is Spanish. Colonized. But I prefer explain in Espanol. It's my second language. Yo chequeé un libro que usted escribió y me preocupa que todavía sigamos trabajando conceptos como estandarización en educación y paralelamente digamos que existe educación crítica, decía más Paulo Freire. ¿Cómo es posible articular lenguajes de estandarización, de colonización y de modernización de la educación en América Latina en razón de provocar procesos
Because of her shoe, and then I think she hit her head.
Maybe we can stop. I can just go outside.
Yeah. Just a moment.
Yeah.
se rompió el
Kind of impolite, not great.
Enquanto a mesma pergunta, tá? Onde ela bateu direito, que aí eu posso levar. Calma, tem um monte de gente.
I'm happy to talk with people after and keep talking.
Calma. A gente encerra. Mantenha. Tá molhado. Viu?
I'm gonna go put on my tennis shoes.
There you go. Okay. What should I do? What should I do? Should I continue?
Are you okay? Oh, yeah. Please, Rodrigo, could you please help dry the floor? Yeah. Sorry about that, ma'am. It's a little bit wet. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Viu? Oh, Thaís.
excuse me, and continue.
Are we able to continue? Please, could you?
Yes, finalizo la reflexión para la respuesta en específico. ¿Cómo es posible entender en América Latina educación crítica, como nos invita a hacer Paulo Freire? ¿Cómo es posible liberar a la población latinoamericana si todavía seguimos pensando en que la educación sea o es colonizada en nuestros pueblos, es modernizada? ¿Y qué debemos hacer para descolonizar el currículum, la formación de los profesores, los libros, los procesos de interaprendizaje, las experiencias, en razón de transmodernizar la educación? Soy Querubín Patricio Flores Núñez, vengo de Quito, Ecuador, trabajo en la Pontificia Universidad Católica del Ecuador.
Great questions. Jessica.
One more, or is that it?
There's one more. Elena. I'm sorry.
Sorry. My name is Helena Mendonça. I'm from here, USP. And Jessica, very impressed about your work. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to make a question concerning the platforms and the critical digital literacy. How can we, those questions with how, they were very good. How can we effectively work with critical literacies on digital platforms, as we have a scenario of digital colonialism on the platforms, and that we know that they are held by 5 big corporations, and we have all the data that are being collected, and all the structure that we have nowadays on the digital that are completely structured and colonized, let's say like this, by those corporations. How can we do this then? Thank you.
So then we wouldn't be able to have any more of the rise. We wouldn't be able to go to the cough break. Yeah.
Okay.
No, don't leave. Don't leave. We have.
I'm going to answer all of those questions right now. No, I'm not. I'm not going to answer them. Thank you so much. I'm going to spend 1 minute addressing them. How's that? So thank you very much to the colleague from Puerto Rico. I think this and actually our comment from our Quechua speaker are related in the sense of how do we our languages are colonized and colonial artifacts, but it is hard for me and I think everyone else to think outside of language, and this is why maybe I need a second career as a sociolinguist, because we can't think outside of our languages, and all of these languages are from colonizers. I mean, many of them are from colonizers, even in places where you have 2 or 3 that are dominant, that they all come from other places. So I would love to talk some more. I think in the case of the question of how do we, you know, I haven't answered that question very well about in standardized spaces and how do we do critical literacy. My answer was to go to a less standardized context and try things, but that's not a solution. That was a research choice to go to a place where there was a little less structure. But I think that's the question I want to talk about with you folks today. Can you be critical in a standardized space? Is it even possible? But can we escape them? And so I'll just say that that Elena's question relates to this, because as our spaces are standardized, they're increasingly digital and governed by data structures that make them even harder to decolonize and be critical about. I'm not being negative or pessimistic, but I'm just saying these are complicated problems that I don't know the answers to, that I would like to talk with you folks about. And I'm hoping that there are graduate students and researchers here and researchers who are doing this kind of work to answer these questions. Like, how do you maintain criticality in a space where there are 5 companies who own these major platforms that we use, for instance, and these include educational testing and curriculum platforms, and how do we have any agency or offer agency, work with teachers to have agency when sometimes it feels like we're just nipping around the edges of a bigger problem. So I don't know the answers to these questions, but I would like to hear and talk more. And I also don't know the answer to the question about humanism in Mexico in relation to critical literacy. I missed this slide somehow from our colleagues in Mexico about work, but this is a tension in Mexico too. This is more of a tension around standardization and what folks are doing in Mexico, but I don't know the answer to that question. Do you know the answer to that question about humanism and critical literacy and the relationship? I think there are definite relationships, but I don't know it in depth. So I'm basically here to learn a bit more from folks, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to put on my tennis shoes so that I don't slip over here. But I think that, thank you so much for the questions and comments, and we'll have to talk more because I don't think I have answers, but I don't want to leave with a sense that the answers don't exist. And I think we must be doing this work to have better answers to these questions. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this work together. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much for your talk. And I'm sure that we have the coffee time for us to socialize and also keep talking and keep reflecting on these issues. Thank you. Yes, there's some information, right, Bill? I'll leave to you.
Okay. Now, this conference is complicated because there are a lot of sessions and the rooms are not close. So it's up to 6 minutes walk to another room. So Rodrigo and Tamara are going to explain how to get to rooms. I want to just mention the session immediately following this is a talking circle. So it's a format that we've been using for quite a long time in these conferences. It's an indigenous idea that we just sit down and before we do anything